All right, all right. Knock it off. We don't got a lot of time, and I want to take questions. All right. First of all, great to see you all here. I think. I don't know. I haven't met you yet. Maybe you suck. I don't know. But you're here, so that's probably a pretty good indication that you're actually paying attention to what's going on in your world and in your country, and you actually want to do something about it, which I'm very happy about. Because I know I love my country. I know I love the values that it was founded on. And I know I'm pretty concerned about the direction it's been headed the last couple of decades. So my background, before I ever got in the military, before I ever got into politics, was in the military, and specifically in special forces. And what Green Berets are, if the way they differentiate between other elements within special operations, is we were the guys that did unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency. So we are either working with the indigenous population to overthrow the government, or we were working with the government to put down the insurgency. That's what we did. And one of the things they hammered into us all throughout training, understand your operational environment. Understand your operational environment. Don't make assumptions about what's going on. You actually need to dig in and understand the culture, the ideas, the religion, the motivations, which cause people to act or behave in a particular way, because that's the only way that you're actually going to achieve your objectives. Because we were largely set into situations where we got a 12-man team, and now we're working with an indigenous population where we might have a 500-man battalion. So what I want to do right now is I want to talk a little bit about my understanding of the current operational environment that you guys are going to be responsible for fighting. Because we all know that famous Reagan quote, right? The idea that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children within the bloodstream. It has to be defended, supported, and passed on to them to do the same. Otherwise, we'll spend our twilight years explaining to our children's children what it was like to once live in America where men were free. Now, I remember hearing that and thinking, wow, that's really inspirational. And not something I really have to be concerned about, because of course America is going to be free. Of course America is going to be powerful. Of course America is going to be secure. Why? Because I looked around at the threats around the world and I just realized that we could just kick the hell out of all of them. And at the same time that we were looking at those external threats, we didn't pay enough attention to the internal ones. So I want to tell you a little story about a Sardinian communist. And this Sardinian communist grew up in kind of difficult circumstances, but he was very, very bright. And he ended up getting a scholarship to university in Italy. And he eventually rose to be the leader of the Communist Party in Italy. And Benito Mussolini didn't like him much, so Mussolini threw him in prison. And as Antonio Gramsci was in prison, he was asking himself, what did Karl Marx get wrong? Now, I think that's a pretty extensive list. But he thought that Karl Marx's critiques of capitalism were perfect. He thought Karl Marx's critiques of the traditional family and of Christianity and of religion in general were perfect. He thought the little socialist utopia that Karl Marx wanted to achieve was dead on. The thing that he recognized Marx got wrong, and by the way, he wasn't incorrect in this analysis, was that communism wasn't taking root in the places that they thought it would. Karl Marx predicted that communism would actually rise in popularity in capitalist societies, in what he called late-stage capitalism. That's where, according to Marx, the internal contradictions of capitalism would cause the proletariat to rise up, seize the means of production, and usher in the dictatorship of the proletariat. Right? That's your little socialist utopia. And yet, it wasn't happening in the countries that were further along the stages of capitalism. It wasn't happening in the UK. It wasn't happening in France. It wasn't happening in Germany. It happened in Russia. And so Gramsci starts thinking about this while he's in prison. And he says, you know, I think what Karl Marx got wrong was this idea that people primarily get their identity based off of their economic status. As if the person working at the factory would have more in common with somebody on the other side of the world also working in a factory than they would with their manager working at the same factory. It turns out that while our job or economic status may be a part of who we are, it's not the predominant part. We get our identity from a whole host of things, whether it's our faith, whether it's our community, our traditions, our history, the food we eat, the clothes we wear. All of those things make up a culture which informs us and protects itself. It's how society is organized. And Gramsci came up with this idea that he goes, if we want to defeat capitalism, then we have to defeat it culturally, not just militarily and not just economically. And so he went about laying out this idea of how you would do that, and it was largely rooted in this concept of you infiltrate culturally shaping institutions, you take them over, and then you use them to undermine the current culture and prop up a culture that will actually be conducive to Marxism. Now, the reason why I'm going through this little history right now is because I believe that Antonio Gramsci is arguably one of the most dangerous Marxists that has ever lived, despite the fact that he never led a country, never led an army, never committed a genocide. He died sickly and poor in a prison. But the reason why I say he is more dangerous or has been more dangerous to the West is because the West actually did a pretty good job of rejecting Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot. And yet, Antonio Gramsci's cultural Marxism and the long march through the institutions has been the single most successful effort communism has ever made to infiltrate a Western society and attempt to rot it from within to replace it for what they wanted. Now, if you don't believe that or if you think that's hyperbolic, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to need a little audience participation this time. I'm going to list off a culturally shaping institution in the United States, one that would be a culturally shaping institution no matter what country it is. And I want you to tell me, do you think this institution that I mentioned is interested in propping up a conservative vision of the United States, one that is rooted in this idea of individual liberty combined with personal responsibility, strong families, property rights, free markets? Or do you think it's an institution that is generally supportive of woke ideology or socialism? Y'all ready? Y'all understand the assignment? Okay. First institution, journalism. Left or right? Left, right? Now, some people will say, yeah, but Nick, you got Fox News, you got OAN, you got Newsmax, you got alternative. Yeah, but do you notice that whenever there's a conservative alternative to the media, we call it a conservative alternative, and when we're referring to the media in general, we call it mainstream media. That's how you know that ideological takeover has taken place. It's not that you have complete control of a particular institution. It's because you have such a level of control that anything outside of what you control is considered fringe or alternative. How about academia? Right, hardcore left. Right, your average university in the United States is probably staff and faculty donating 80% of their campaign donations go to left-wing causes. 80%. That's a conservative estimate. Until you get into the sociology department, the education department, the journalism department, the arts department, the studies departments, and then it's more like 95 to 99%. So the very institutions which are creating our teachers, our journalists, our HR professionals, are the most left of the left within the university system, which is already left. Okay, here's another one. Hollywood. Right? That is a culturally shaping institution. Arts and entertainment in Hollywood. When was the last time you saw a popular sitcom or even a cartoon that didn't treat fathers like they were idiots and buffoons? That's a part of the messaging. That's a part of the messaging. That's intentional. I remember sitting there, my daughters loved watching Barbie. So I would sit there and I'd watch Barbie with my little girls, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm critiquing the economic policies of Barbie with my little girls. Like, that's stupid. I can't believe she's going to, the mine ran out of gold and now she's got to marry off her daughter. That's horrible economic policy. They should have diversified their economy. And my daughter's like, Daddy, can we please just watch the show? Like, no, I'm spitting pearls here. But you all see the point, right? Hollywood. How about the federal bureaucracy? Left or right? What did we learn with USAID and organizations like Planned Parenthood? They were getting hundreds of millions of dollars from the taxpayers in order to push left-wing ideological objectives. This is not even big-style private donors funding their favorite things. No, this is the government confiscating your money through taxation and then giving it to NGOs and the abortion industry so they could push their objective. And oh, by the way, take some of the money that they took through taxation because it's fungible and then give it back to Democrats in the form of campaign contributions. Tell me that isn't a self-licking ice cream cone. Okay, here's one more, and this one is probably the one that hurts the most for me. How about the church? Right? For most of history, we looked at the church as a bulwark for standing for objective truth and objective morality. But whenever I see a progressive church, I will always see somebody up there as a pastor or bishop or whatever else, and they spend far more time talking about abortion or trans ideology than they ever do the gospel or Christ. So I think we have to come to the conclusion that the operational environment that we are currently in is one where the left has been incredibly successful in infiltrating and subverting the vast majority of the culturally shaping institutions within our country. That's your environment. The question is, what do you do about it? Well, I think it's important to understand how they got there. James Lindsay, I think, does one of the best explanations I've ever seen. And see if you've actually experienced this in your own life, maybe with a club, maybe with some sort of institution or organization that you've been a member on. The first thing the woke demand is access. And the way that they justify access is, well, you want to be an open and tolerant person. You want to be kind. You believe in classical liberalism. You believe in this idea that all voices should be heard and have an opportunity to be able to present their arguments in a fair and equitable setting. And so you grant access. But then access isn't good enough. They need accommodation, right? The reason why they didn't have access before is because you didn't do enough to accommodate what they believed or what they thought. You didn't do enough to make them feel welcome, so now they need accommodation. But then accommodation isn't good enough. You didn't do the accommodation right. They need a seat at the table with respect to making decisions, because that's the only way that they can actually improve access and accommodation to help more people like them. So you give them a seat at the table. Then they control the table. And after they control the table, they exclude you. How many of you guys have heard the term the paradox of tolerance? This is becoming more and more prevalent because one of the things we point out whenever the left is criticizing us is, wow, for people that preach a lot of tolerance, you don't seem to display much, at least not toward us. And then their response is, but that's Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance. You can't tolerate intolerance in a generally tolerant society. Now, there's a certain element of this is true, right? You can't be a tolerant society and tolerate murder. Can we agree with that? But then what they do is they shift the goalposts. And now it's any position that you take that doesn't reinforce their belief system or their worldview is now intolerant, and you can be excluded. And if they need to use government power to exclude you, to deplatform you, to debank you, to imprison you, to take your house away, to take your kids away, to confiscate your guns, well, so be it, because you're intolerant. And now they freeze them to engage in as much authoritarianism as they want and to do so with the approval of their own conscience. That's the operational environment we find ourselves in. Who here has seen the movie Starship Troopers? All dudes, not a shocker there. And one very informed lady. Horrible movie, first of all. The book was actually kind of an interesting commentary on how to organize society, but the movie is horrible. But there's this one scene in the movie. That I kind of love and has become somewhat iconic among Gen Xers. And this is the part where the humans have been getting their butts kicked by these space alien bugs that have been hurling asteroids at Earth. And you're probably thinking, wow, Nick, this seems like some highbrow entertainment. Just stick with me, all right? Humans are fighting the space alien bugs. Space alien bugs are kicking the living hell out of us. And then there's this moment in the midst of the conflict, and it's not toward the end of the war. It doesn't leave with the humans winning or anything like that. But there's this moment where they capture this like brain bug thing. And this intel officer walks over and puts his hand on it, and he uses like telepathy or something. I don't know. But the point is, he puts his hand on it, he goes, "It's afraid." I want you to think about that for a second. They had all the advantages. They were winning at that point, right? The bugs. But all of a sudden, there's that moment where it's afraid.
Something has happened over the last couple of years where it doesn't matter how many institutions they've taken over. It doesn't matter how loud they scream or kick or call us names. None of it matters. It's afraid. Because they can try to control as many institutions as they want. But the bottom line is their ideas don't work. They fly in the very face of what it is to be human. They fly in the face of what it is to long for something good and noble and pure. They try to rob us of beauty. They try to rob us of humor. They try to rob us of achievement. And for decades, we've just kind of took it. And we're not taking it anymore. And the merest amount of pushback, the merest amount of successful pushback, and they lose their minds. Why? Because they're nowhere near as strong as they appear to be, and because it's afraid. What I want to tell you is this. Every generation in all of American history has had some sort of conflict, some sort of struggle that they were responsible for either fighting or capitulating to. When I was your age, I was in the military. September 11th had happened. And it was about fighting terrorism. And I can write you a book on all the problems I have with U.S. foreign policy, but I remember at that point being very, very clear on what my mission, what my duty was for my generation. Please believe me when I tell you this, and I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not just trying to amp you up. I want you to be excited about the mission of your generation, but I also want you to be aware of the consequences of what happens if you fail. You are fighting one of the greatest existential crises that we've ever had with the United States. It will be your generation's responsibility to rise to this occasion. You can choose to fight, or you can choose to ignore it. But you will not be able to surrender the responsibility that is naturally yours by the virtue of the time and space in which you were born. That's something of the nature of history. What I want you to be, though, I want you to be aware of the operational environment, but I also want you to be excited for the purpose that is before you. Because I can tell you this much. I remember when I was a 25-year-old Green Beret in Iraq on my first tour, and I had a wife and 2 kids at home. And I remember contending with this idea that there were certain moves or actions or decisions that I could make that could potentially get me killed, potentially get one of my good friends killed. Not to mention the fact that we were trying to defeat organizations which were inherently evil, in my opinion. And I remember that being a very real thing for me as a 25-year-old Green Beret, husband, father. I remember it hitting me again in 2008 when now I had 3 kids. And there was one time in particular when I can remember this idea that the next move I make is most likely going to get me killed. It was very raw. But I can remember a couple of things in those moments that always sustained me. One of them was my dad, who was a LAPD homicide detective, conveying a story to me where he was talking about an officer that had been under fire, left cover in order to rescue another officer, and took hits, got shot several times trying to rescue this guy. And he watched as his own commander basically tried to throw him under the bus, and my dad defended him along with the rest of the panel that were reviewing the shooting. And there was this moment that my dad recalled to me where somebody was questioning the decision that was made in order to support this officer in the midst of a dangerous situation and what he had done and how he had acted bravely and honorably. And he said, well, you don't think he could have done this better, he could have done that better, you don't think he should have stayed here? And the other officer looked at him and said, no, sir, we're the ones they call. I can distinctly remember being in times where it was, man, I don't want to do this, or man, this could get bad really, really quick. And I remember that idea of hearing those words in my head over and over and over again of my dad saying, we're the ones they call. I want you guys to embrace that. It comes with a lot of responsibility. But it also puts you in a very unique position to be worthy of everyone that came before you of everyone that built the sort of country that we have right now. Because what we have in this country is not a foregone conclusion. It is not destiny. I have this picture of George Washington at the Prairie Valley Forge. You guys know which one I'm talking about? The one where he's got his horse and he's on a knee and he's praying at Valley Forge. And when you see that photo, it's difficult for us to not envision it as, oh, that's the father of our country. That's the victorious general of the Continental Army. It's the man that saved his nation and then set it on the trajectory that we currently appreciate. In that moment, he was none of those things. He was a general that had repeatedly failed on the battlefield against the British. His own army was threatening desertion. Congress was failing to actually give him the supplies that he needed to successfully conduct the fight. See, it's easy to look back and elevate these people and put them on a pedestal as if the conclusion was always inevitable. But it wasn't. He made a choice. We're the beneficiaries of that choice. As you prepare for the fight that you're going into, because you do have time to prepare, just probably not as much as you think, I want you to remember that regardless of what you choose, generations will look back and either be grateful or wonder why you didn't fight when you had the opportunity and responsibility. So take the time that you have here. Learn the things that you need to. Develop the arguments. Develop the policy. If you're going to go into politics, then study what you need to do in order to be noble and virtuous in the midst of that environment. If you're going to go into the arts and entertainment, then study what you need to do in order to convey and storytell in a way that is convincing to people and moves them. If you're going to go into the military, then learn what you need to do in order to make sure that we're the best in the world. Also, please never forget this. I look back on various stages of my life, and there's certain things that I wish I would have done better. There's other things that I'm proud of. But I will tell you right now, I think the single greatest contribution I might have ever given to my country was not in the military and it wasn't in politics. It was being a husband to my wife and a father to my children. I don't know who else I might have convinced in this world to believe what we believe in and to be willing to fight for it. But I know my kids believe it. And so as you fight to save your country, remember that one of the greatest contributions you can ever make to saving your country is saving your family. There's a reason why Karl Marx hated the family. It's because he understood that there's nothing quite so powerful on this earth as a God-fearing man and woman who become husband and wife, who become mom and dad, and who raise kids to believe in this, to fight for it, and to love it. So thank you all very much for being here today. All right. All right, hey. Don't clap for politicians. It only encourages us. All right, I think we got some time to take some questions, so happy to do my best at giving good answers.
Hi, Nick. My name is Beatrice Ellison. I'm a student at the University of Dallas. I'm the vice chair. I'm a vice chair of our YAF chapter there. And I'm really blessed to be able to go to college. I'm a very academic person. I really care about learning and studying and things like that. And I really care about the public school system. I care about universities, and I care about kids being able to go to school and get education. And I think, do you think, like I said, I want to save the public school system, and I think that we really need to be able to have schools for kids to go to. I'm super pro homeschooling, of course, as well, but I think having lots of schools everywhere for kids to be able to go to is a really good thing. But obviously they're just completely destroyed by leftist ideology, and of course they're controlled by the government. Do you think we should save them from the inside, or do you think we should abandon them at this point? And this goes with public universities as well. I mean, the University of Dallas is a private school, and so I'm very blessed to be able to go to a conservative private school, but do you think we should abandon most of the other institutions?
Here's what I'll say. I think a lot of people find themselves in situations where they cannot afford or otherwise secure an alternative to what the public school system is because they're being taxed for it regardless. And the government has put themselves in a very unique position where they can take your money for education and then they can offer you a brand of education. And if you don't want it, they say, fine, you can choose something else, but your money stays with us. I find something inherently unjust about that. I think we also need to start asking some very, very difficult questions about whether or not the government should manage education. Because let's face it, everyone in here would understand the problem with state-run media, right? If the government controlled the news outlets, you would be like, there's something wrong with that. Why? Because now they're controlling the flow of information to the body politic. Well, they do control the flow of information to your kids through the school system. Now, some school systems are run very well, some are not run as well. The thing I would say is I think we also need to reevaluate the way we look at education. So I homeschooled my kids. They were in public school for about a year. I always tell people that if you fixed everything with the public school system tomorrow, I would still homeschool my kids. Why? Because I didn't just put them into that environment to avoid what was going on in a woke school system. I put them into the homeschool environment because I wanted to recapture the idea that I am an educator in my child's life. I think there is something difficult that we have to contend with this idea of I provide for my kids housing, clothes, food, but then I send them off to the experts for their education. Now, that's not to say that you can't use expertise for education. You absolutely should. But I never wanted to stop being an influential educator in my child's life. The other thing I think we need to understand about the public school system is, regardless of how you feel about some of the moral components going on right now, public school is a mass production approach to education, and you will get mass production results. So I would like to see us look at education not so much as a building that you go to. I would like to see it as a lifelong experience of loving education, loving learning new things. It's the transference of knowledge and wisdom to upcoming generations. And I think, unfortunately, the government control over that has corrupted it. And I don't know how we decouple the corruption from the government control other than to leave the government-controlled institutions. Now, in the meantime, my son-in-law is a school counselor, and he wants to do the best for his students because he recognizes that so many of his students are struggling. And he wants to be there as a voice and guidance, and I totally respect that. But I do think we need to seriously take a look at what constitutes quality education and ask ourselves whether or not we think the government running it is the appropriate approach, because to be perfectly honest, I do not.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I attend Virginia Commonwealth University. You kind of summed up earlier that identity is multidimensional. So I guess my question to you is, how can we message that to people who think conservatism is overly simplistic?
Well, I don't think, the real question is, what's the truth? And I think that a lot of people within what we might call critical theory or intersectionality, they've adopted this idea that truth is subjective, or that truth is all a matter of perspective. And so what it is, I think they've overcomplicated something. And so we're not trying to be overly simplistic. We're just saying that while one can have many facets to their identity, that doesn't change reality. So I can feel a certain way about my gender, but that doesn't change what my actual biological sex is. It doesn't change what my gender is, because let's face it, gender is kind of a made-up term. But we can recognize, for instance, that there are genuinely masculine traits and generally feminine traits. And we can recognize that some men have more feminine traits and some women have more masculine traits. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but it doesn't make you something other than what you are. It's an aspect of your personality or your character. So we can appreciate that. But the moment they force us to say that because this characteristic generally exists on the feminine, and it's demonstrated over here by a man, therefore the man is a woman. That's us saying, no, that's not correct, is not an oversimplification of identity. It's a recognition of reality, because truth is that which reflects reality. But unfortunately, when you take on this postmodernist viewpoint, which many of them have, which is this idea that it's all relative. First of all, I just want to throw this out there because I think it's all connected. If somebody tells you there's no such thing as absolute truth, what's the first question you should ask them? Is that true? There's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as truth. There's your truth and my truth. Is that true? Well, because if they say yes, it's true, well, then now that's an absolute truth that it's true. If they say it's not true, then why am I believing you if you don't even believe what you believe? There's so much of what they engage in which are internal contradictions. And then here's what they do. They shift the burden from trying to figure out what's true to being tolerant. Can I just say something right now? Tolerance does not have any inherent moral meaning whatsoever. Whether or not tolerance is a moral attribute or an immoral attribute depends entirely on the context. And I will tell you right now, there is nothing tolerant about telling a gender-confused 10-year-old that they should take chemical castration medicine. And that doesn't make me a bad person. And so I think part of what it is reorienting the story. And I think this is another thing conservatives need to do. We should be advocates for the truth, not in an arrogant way, but in just something that we discover about interacting with reality. But the other thing we need to recognize is some of the worst things going on to people right now is people valuing tolerance over the truth. I believe you should speak the truth in love and respect. But I'm not going to lie to make you feel better. If a young woman came up to me and said, clearly had anorexia and said they wanted diet pills, I wouldn't consider giving them to her affirming care. And yet they seem to do the same thing when it comes to this other issue. So I would just say it's not that we have a simplistic worldview. We are diligently trying to discover the truth. And we believe truth is an actual thing. It's not just your perspective versus my perspective. We can have different perspectives on the same event, but part of the reason why we talk and discuss is so that we can actually get a more complete picture of what the truth is. Because ultimately, we have to live our lives in accordance with the truth. We can't bend truth to our will. And so I don't think it's I think part of it is explaining how it's not overly simplistic, but how they may be overcomplicating something to their detriment.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm from South Korea, and it's an honor to come to America, country of freedom and prosperity. First of all, I'm very sorry to second language. Please understand even if I'm not good at it. Thank you. There are wars all over the world. Ukraine, Russia, Iran, Israel, Cambodia, Thailand, lastly Korea. Korea is either now hybrid war with CSP. Hybrid warfare is scary. There are invisible attacks. And many people don't know they are being attacked. And among them, there may be the most destructive war. There is even a war that threatens to escalate into World War III. I think it's closest rate relations. If there is a war between Taiwan and China, what will Korea do? Strategically, South Korea may advance north to prepare for invasion from North Korea. Alternatively, it may face Beijing, which is close to the Korean peninsula. In this way, Korea can contribute to maintaining the U.S. as a hegemonic power. Above all, Koreans like the USA very much. According to the actual survey, the favorability of the USA exceeds 90%. In fact, Korea was founded by President Syngman Lee on the basis of the constitutional spirit and independence of the USA. So USA and Korea are inseparable. We are strategic allies and friends. The United States and Korea must fight together against evil forces. I will ask you a question, sir. What do you think about South Korea or hybrid war and etc.? Thank you.
So on the hybrid war, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about there, unless you're talking about like asymmetrical warfare and the use of like cyber technology and other things like that. As far as South Korea, I actually got to train with the South Korean Special Missions Group. When I was in 1st Special Forces Group, got to visit South Korea a couple of times. And I think one of the things that we need to look at, especially as we're looking at U.S. foreign policy, and we're entering into this new era of U.S. foreign policy. And the question is, because the United States has made some mistakes with our foreign policy, some significant ones, and ones that really hurt the American people very deeply. I think the pullout of Afghanistan was probably the personification of a lot of frustration with a very, very bungled foreign operation. I think as we look at what the United States role is going to be going forward, I don't think our purpose is to be isolationist. I think we do need to have an American first foreign policy, but American first foreign policy doesn't mean we alienate countries that we've had long-standing relationships and allegiances with and alliances with, especially when there's a common enemy or a common threat. And so I think one of the things that we're looking at from U.S. foreign policy, from an American first foreign policy perspective, is how do we identify those countries which share our values, which are of mutual economic and security benefits, and which are actually also willing to contribute the necessary resources to their own security and not just relying on the United States. And I think when we take all those things into consideration, we're going to find out the United States does have allies and alliances that we want to maintain, and there's going to be other ones that we rethink. Now, my personal opinion is that our alliance with South Korea is incredibly important because of its geographical position within the world and also because of the long-standing agreements that we have with the Korean government. So do I think South Korea should be taking the necessary steps to provide for its own security? Absolutely. Do I think the United States also has a vested interest in maintaining South Korea as free against communism, either from North Korea or China? Yes, I do. I think that's in our strategic interest as well. And that's how we need to evaluate things. We need to evaluate things not just from the perspective of the United States being perceived as kind of the police force of the world or the world's sugar daddy when it comes to foreign aid, but when there is a legitimate alliance, when there's mutual interest, we should absolutely maintain those relationships, and I think that exists with South Korea.
Hey, Nick Freitas. I'm Cameron. I come from Arizona State University in Arizona. My question is, I found you through your short YouTube videos. You seem to be a guy who's just generally good at giving good dad advice. As someone who is, as my sister would describe me, who is chronically single, and who wants to get married and be a father, how would you recommend trying to begin the journey of marriage and fatherhood?
Okay, so are you going to be at the men's luncheon?
No idea.
Okay, the men's luncheon is following like almost immediately after this. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna go in.
Now I know what you're talking about.
I'm gonna go into a lot of detail on that particular subject at that luncheon. So I know we got a big line of questions. So I want you to know if you're there, I will definitely be happy to answer this question in more detail than you could possibly want.
Hello, sir. My name is Ethan from Cosumnes River College. I just wanted to ask a question about MAGA. Obviously, MAGA has completely changed both political parties, and there have been accusations that MAGA is not a conservative movement and that it's a regressive movement that wants to return America to racial segregation. So how do we contend that MAGA is a conservative movement when it obviously has shifted away from the likes of Bush and Reagan, and how do we contend that MAGA is the best force for our country moving forward?
Well, one of the things I think we need to be honest about is Reagan was conservative. Bush was not. I think we also need to understand that part of what's taking place in MAGA is that it is not exclusively a conservative movement. There's elements to MAGA which are all fighting back against what we might call woke or critical theory or the latest insanity that the left has come up with. But co-belligerence doesn't mean we're all allies and wanting the same thing. So I'm certainly willing to fight with people to defeat what I perceive to be as a common enemy. But I also think we need to articulate what does a conservative future look like. Now, there's three categories that I will kind of put MAGA broadly. One category of MAGA on the right is this idea of we just need to reset to like 2008, right? They were fine with everything that took place all the way up into the point where it got woke and crazy, and if we can just reset to there, we'll be fine. I don't agree with that. There's another set of MAGA that is actually starting to question the entire classical liberal approach, the entire classical liberal experiment. And now they're shooting usually in one of two directions. Some people are looking at the idea of a more traditional, I shouldn't say traditional because it's not in the American sense. They actually look at something like monarchy as something to consider. There's another side that goes in a much darker direction, which is exclusively reactionary. They essentially say, I want to be the exact opposite of what woke is. I don't want to be the exact opposite of what woke is. I want to be good. I want to be noble, and I need to know what that is so I can defeat woke and then achieve something noble. The third category, I guess, is I would say it's those of us who still believe in certain principles of classical liberalism, but realize that it needs to be rooted in something beyond the secular. There has to be a foundation of objective truth and objective morality for you to build a society, a culture, a governing body. And I think as we go forward in trying to defeat woke, we need to do a good job of not only articulating what we're trying to defeat, but what we're actually trying to achieve. And if we can do that properly, then we can define MAGA and direct MAGA in the direction that achieves the sort of end states that we want, the sort of end states that does uplift masculinity and femininity and the family and free markets and property rights and individual liberty combined with personal responsibility. So I think that's the answer to the question, is that, yes, there's different factions within MAGA, and we just need to recognize that. The question is what faction is going to become dominant? And I hope it's the one that believes in the values I just articulated.
Hi, my name is Sutton Ingram. I'm from the College of Idaho. And you're talking about kind of going against these principles as conservatives. But how do we best rally like the middlemen and show them that our values are good and what we're fighting for is good and bring them alongside us to help fight against this?
There's certainly something to be said for good argumentation. And good argumentation is not just making esoteric arguments about individual liberty, right? It's about humanizing those arguments in a way that makes sense to people. One of the reasons why we suddenly have this backlash against wokeism and liberalism, which seem to be on the ascendancy for a few decades now, is because they went way too far when it came to COVID and way too far when it came to our kids. And so a lot of the times when we actually express the ideas that we care about, we shouldn't just do it as, again, some sort of like 10,000 foot level heavily academic argument. We need to find the practical examples that people can relate to that actually, again, personify and humanize those arguments. I don't just believe in free markets because I think it achieves better economic results. I believe in free markets because what it actually does is empower the individual to find out what is the best way that they can serve others while still serving themselves. It creates all the proper incentives to allow you to organize your life in such a way that is beneficial to you and beneficial to others. And the alternatives to that rob you of your dignity, rob you of your freedom, and I find that unacceptable. But if you can find the story, if you can find the story of the person that personifies that argument, you can connect with people. You can connect with people that are not interested in your grandiose argument on free market economics, right? They want something that's tangible that they can feel and they can relate to, and that's why it's so important that we make those arguments. Can I tell you the other best example I can give for winning this? Live your life in accordance with your values and let the fruits of that speak for themselves, right? If I'm going to tell you that it's important as a man for you to be strong, competent, capable, and I'm fat, lazy, and weak, you're not going to believe me. If I'm going to tell you that it's important to be a strong husband for your wife, and then I'm cheating on her or watching porn, I'm a liar. If I'm going to tell you that you need to be there for your kids, and all I do is provide a space for them to live, but I don't actually interact with them in a way that I can actually transfer my values and make them feel like they are safe and loved, then I failed as a father. But if you do the opposite of all those things, if you actually invest in what it means to be a good man, a good husband, a good father, a good woman, a good wife, a good mother, and you see the benefits from that, so does everybody else. And I will tell you right now, there are so many people now that couldn't care less what their sociology professor from Berkeley, who's on their third marriage, right, to a trans guy, says about how to be successful in life. What they're interested in is looking around at the people that seem to have their stuff together. Maybe they're not the richest, maybe they're not the strongest, maybe they're not the most powerful, but they see a family where they love each other and they support one another. That sort of example right now, again, we need to do a better job of living our lives in such a way as we create the longing for the thing we advocate for. Thanks. Welcome.
Last question. This is the last question.
Hi, Nick. My name is Harley Burnett. I'm from Cedarville University. And kind of going off of the previous question and your response, like living our lives in light of our values. As a Christian conservative, I look at the Sydney Sweeney scandal, and I see conservatives who say that we should be faithful, we should stop watching porn, we should stop with the promiscuity. But then I see the same people upholding promiscuity and sexual immorality when it comes to somebody who's a conservative? How do you think we should respond to that?
That is a great question, because this is part of the paradox of the situation we find ourselves in, where we talk about co-belligerents versus allies. So what are the aspects of the response to the Sydney Sweeney ad that makes sense to us as conservatives? Well, first of all, this backlash against Sydney Sweeney. I think we can agree that it is, in fact, objectively true that Sydney Sweeney does have good genes, right? She is a pretty woman. And that makes the left mad. The other thing that makes the left mad is that they did this whole reference to genes and they try to make it a dog whistle for fascism. I think that's absurd. So I think it's perfectly appropriate for us to say that we want to elevate the beautiful and the fit, and we want to elevate this idea of being able to do a funny play on words without it being automatically descending into a discussion on whether or not Sydney Sweeney's Hitler, because after all, her initials are SS, right? By the same token, the thing I didn't like about the ad, and I'm not just trying to be like an old Puritan here, the thing I didn't like about the ad is that, look, I have 2 daughters. And I think about this from the perspective, if my daughter did that commercial, would I be happy about it? And the answer is no. Not because I don't appreciate that Sydney Sweeney did an ad that she probably kind of knew the left would do a backlash against, and she did it anyways. There's an element of that I can appreciate. But I don't like it when we try to sell things based off of lust. And I think there was an aspect of lust in there. Now, we can debate all day long about whether or not it was better than the ads in the 90s, and in some cases it probably was. But I think one of the things that, again, I want to do is when we discuss the idea of beauty, when we discuss the idea of attraction, I would like to be something where we can appreciate the physical aesthetic while also understanding that virtue is also a beautiful thing. Somebody asked me once why I fell in love with my wife, and I said, well, first of all, she's smoking hot. By the same token, there was something about her personality and her dynamic where she stood for the truth, and she was willing to do so at the cost of popularity, which in high school was kind of the pinnacle of what everyone was chasing. She didn't care. She stood up for what was right, and she conducted herself in a way that I just found incredibly attractive. And so I think it's important that while we elevate the aesthetic, we also elevate virtue. Now, I will say this. I still think that there's a funny way that we can talk about stuff like the Sydney Sweeney ad. So if you'll allow me to do a shameless plug for my own Instagram page, when that ad came out, I had a little bit, I appreciated the backlash against wokeism, but I had something of a check about this idea of this really what we're supposed to elevate as the standard. And so my response to the ad was I got on there and I said, well, this new jeans ad with Sydney Sweeney has got the left really upset, and the conservatives are bashing him, but not me. I'm with the libs on this one. In fact, I was so furious, I immediately came home and told my wife to take off her jeans and then take off the rest of her clothes, just in case it was American Eagle, right? And the reason why I took that kind of spicy approach was because she's not just some random, I'm not referring to a random woman, I'm referring to my wife. And one of the things I want conservatives to understand and appreciate is that when we talk about sex or when we talk about those issues, I don't think it should be this sort of like taboo thing that we throw off. I think it's the sort of thing that we should elevate as being a beautiful interaction within the confines of marriage, because that's where it takes place, where you can actually create children. That's where you can build a bond with another human being who you love and respect, not just lust after. And so that would be my response. All right. Thank you all very much.
Do we actually have time for 1 or 2 more questions, if you're up for it?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes.
Oh, he lied. We can take more questions. All you guys were in line, you should be
I'm a liar.
Go seize the means of talking in the microphone. I'll go quick on the answers. I know I filibustered.
All right, so a lot of people believe classical liberalism is what led to the society as we know it now. How do you feel if that can continue to lead us in a different direction or continue to help our society today?
It wasn't just classical liberalism. It was classical liberalism built on a foundation of Christianity. Now, am I suggesting that someone who is not a Christian can't be a good American? No, that's not what I'm suggesting. But I'm suggesting if you look at all of the state constitutions, if you look at the vast majority of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, what you're going to find is that this country was founded by dedicated Christians, not deists, dedicated Christians. Now, why is that important to classical liberalism? Well, if you look at John Locke went so far to actually suggest that atheism should be outlawed. right? So this idea that classical liberalism automatically means tolerance no matter what, that's not actually accurate, right? There's various strands of classical liberalism. I think the John Locke version is one that I admire. The Jean-Jacques Rousseau one is one I do not admire. But here's what we know about any society, I don't care where it is, and no matter what system of government you try to build, if you do not build a system of government upon a moral foundation which believes in the objectivity of both truth and morality, it will crumble. Because if man is elevated to God over society, then you're going to get men for gods. And that doesn't work out well. So we have to build on something that's transcendent. And classical liberalism in the American tradition was not just simply built as a standalone secular philosophy. It was rooted on a culture that actually embraced the values of Christianity. That doesn't mean we perfectly executed all of them. We never do. But I think it's important to make that distinction. So I still believe in the classical liberal experiment, but I think it has to be built on a firm foundation that is outside of itself. I don't think it's self-sustaining. Does that make sense? Okay.
Howdy, my name's Caroline Hughes. I'm from Texas A&M University. Thanks, guys. And I just wanted to know your general advice for women, especially a lot of women in this room that are in the process of completing their education or who are already educated past the college level, who want to go through and make a difference in the wider world while also understanding that their household and their family is their entire world.
So again, I always kind of come back to my faith. My wife has described, have you ever read Proverbs 31? Okay, so my wife describes Proverbs 31 as the most intimidating woman she's ever read about. Because if you actually read about that woman within the Bible, she's kind and she's loving and she's a good wife and she's a good mother and she's a good homemaker, but she's also industrious and she's aggressive and she's entrepreneurial. So I think what we need to understand is that when I look at things like the trad wife movement, my concern is that turns into an aesthetic or a fetish instead of an actual understanding of what femininity, like the full comprehensive nature of femininity actually looks like. I can tell you right now as a man, I believe that my job is to protect and provide for my family, and I do believe that I'm supposed to be the spiritual head of my household. Because I didn't make up marriage, God did. And my job is to conform to what he designed, not try to alter it for him. He doesn't require my assistance on that. I think women should do the same thing, but I think we all need to understand that when we look at that, again, from my perspective, a biblical view, a woman is an incredibly powerful individual, both within the marriage, with her relationship with God, with her relationship with her husband, with her relationship with her children, and with her relationship with her community. And so I don't see a great deal of limits on what a woman can pursue professionally. I think what we always need to ask ourselves is, what do we really want? And what do we think is going to give us the most sense of identity and meaning and purpose? And I think as long as we're pursuing that faithfully and we're not allowing the culture to influence us away by elevating one aspect over another, I think we usually land in the right spot, right? Again, if we're following something true and transcendent, not just popular. But that's probably the best answer I can get on it. I think God summed it up well with Proverbs 31. Yeah.
This is the last question.
I'll tell you what, if I go really quick, can I go through the others?
Yes.
Okay, nobody else in line. That's the cutoff. All right, go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Ann Rogers. I go to the University of Florida, and I just kind of wanted to ask you about the progress that we've seen kind of already in this first few months of this second Trump administration. I think has been very important. So, like, in terms of the next administration in the next election cycle, are there certain important values that you think the next conservative administration should focus on to keep that progress going?
I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that there's so much correction that needs to take place within the government. And I think one of the most powerful things that we can use is, one, use legitimate government power the way it should be used. So when we talk about immigration policy, when we talk about defense policy, when we talk about things that are very clearly the province of the federal government, we should use the power to achieve as much as we possibly can. I think another thing that we have to do is drastically reduce the size of the federal government. Right? We have to take away this apparatus of power which has consistently been used against us and our values in order to increase and elevate the power of government within society as opposed to the power of the individual, the family, the church, the civic organization. Look, if I had my way, and I don't think I'm going to, but if I had my way, we'd get rid of the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, we'd get rid of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, we would drastically reduce the federal government to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which go read Article 1, Section 8, and then look at the number of government agents we have, and you explain to me how that's constitutional, other than they have the money through the 16th Amendment to build all of it. So I really think we do need to work on using the power of government. I'm not one of these conservatives that believes, oh, if we use the power, well then... They've already used the power. We've got it now. People expect us to use it appropriately. So let's use it appropriately, but let's also use it to significantly reduce the size of the federal government's influence within our lives and return to the sort of system which actually respects the province of the state when it comes to our federal structure, but then respects the province of the individual, the family, and the church.
My name is Sophia Downing, and I'm from Liberty University. Go Flames. And I'm also an aspiring Christian conservative writer. And as we all know, the entertainment industry is pretty left. So my question to you is, what's the most effective way for conservative students to challenge institutional bias without reinforcing the narrative that we're like just angry reactionaries?
There has never been a better time to compete in the arts and entertainment. You guys are going to hear from Nerdrotic and Critical Drinker later in the week. Nerdrotic and I did this entire podcast where we talked about what was going on with Hollywood, and this also transfers to the publishing realm as well. There has never been a better time to be an independent actor and to try ideas and to throw things out there and to self-publish or to just put things out online and see how they do. So what I would say is one of the ways that we dominate the culture is through the stories that we tell. And so I think telling those stories from those perspectives and learning the various aspects to the story arc, right, the hero's journey and things like that, and then applying it in a positive direction is absolutely critical to saving our country. There's never been a time to do it, so go out there, experiment, try different platforms, try different ways, try different stories, collaborate with other people. But that's one of the areas that I'm really enthusiastic about is the fact that we do have these platforms now where we don't have to go through the traditional institutions, where you don't have to go through Hollywood to make a movie. You don't have to go through the major publishing companies to write a successful book. You can step out there and allow them to crowdsource. So I would just say, be bold on that. But here's the other thing I would say. One of the things that has kind of frustrated me about Christian entertainment is that it thinks it deserves an audience because it's Christian. And I think if you're going to be Christian, then be good. And so really focus on being the best. Okay, I'm going to go quick. No?
We're out of time.
We're out of time. My bad. Sorry. I'll answer your question later. Thank you.